Welcome to Learn English 5 Days, the podcast that will take your English from okay to good and from good to great. Today's episode is something different from the normal. We will be diving deep into the process of learning a language. We all speak a language that we haven't learned from anywhere, but we speak that language from childhood that is our first language. A second language is one that you learn after first language or native language. So my first language is Hindi and my second language is English. Technically, you can have a third, fourth, fifth, and so on, but we commonly use the term second language to refer to any language learned after your first. Do you know what is second language acquisition? Acquisition means acquiring, getting something. In this context, it means learning. So second language acquisition is the study of how we learn languages. You might be thinking, why do you use the word acquisition? Then, why not just say second language learning? Usually, when we hear the word learning, we think of reading books, studying, or memorizing. Memorization is different than acquisition. Languages can't be memorized because a language is innate. Innate means we have something from birth. We acquire our first language when we listen to the language around us and people communicate with us. This process of learning a language has worked in human history. What doesn't work so well is language teaching, at least for most people. Studies have shown not many people spoke language well after years of classes. We all know there are grammar rules to learn, and you have to fill the gaps with vocabulary, and bam, you are speaking a language. But that doesn't usually happen, does it? Maybe some of you have enjoyed that method of learning, but I am one of those annoying people. In the 1970s, a linguist called Krashen had a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an idea in science that someone tries to prove. He believed that we learn languages by communicating and understanding messages. He called this the theory of comprehensible input. Comprehensible means easy to understand, and input is information that you put into something. Krashen believed receiving input is reading and listening that is comprehensible and easy to understand. In other words, we learn language when people speak to us in a way we can understand. A second language is one that you learn after first language or native language. So my first language is Hindi and my second language is English. Technically, you can have a third, fourth, fifth, and so on, but we commonly use the term second language to refer to any language learned after your first. All right, let's dive deeper into Krashen's theory of language learning, but we'll keep it easy and fun to understand, like telling a story. Imagine you're on an exciting journey to learn a new language. Krashen, our language guide, says this journey is like an adventure where you explore, stumble, and grow. The two paths. Krashen tells us there are two ways to learn, just like there are two ways to learn how to play a game. One way is by reading all the rules and studying them hard. The other way is by playing the game and getting better as you go, even if you don't know all the rules yet. Krashen calls these learning and acquiring. Learning is like studying grammar rules, and acquiring is like picking up the language naturally as you use it. Example: think of learning grammar rules as reading a book about soccer before ever playing. Acquiring the language is like playing soccer with friends and getting better each time you play, even if you don't know every rule perfectly. The I+1 shortcut. Now, let's imagine you're in a magical forest full of language challenges. Krashen says you'll learn best when you face challenges that are a bit harder than what you already know. He calls this I+1. I is what you already understand, and +1 is something a little more challenging. Example: if you understand basic words and sentences, trying to read a simple story in the new language, which is a bit harder, is like finding the +1 challenge. The tower of input. Picture a tower made of language blocks. The taller the tower, the better you understand the language. but you can only add blocks, or knowledge, if they're easy for you to understand. This tower is built with comprehensible input, which means language you can understand, even if it's a bit tricky. Example: watching a children's show in the new language, where they speak slowly and use simple words, is like adding bricks to your tower of language knowledge. The reading quest. Krashen tells us about the magic of reading. Imagine you're on a treasure hunt through books written in the new language. The more you read, the more treasures, new words and ideas you collect. This is called extensive reading, and it's like filling your backpack with language treasures. Example: reading comic books or easy novels in the new language is like finding gold coins on your reading quest. The emotional compass. Finally, Krashen talks about your emotional compass. It's like a guide that helps you stay positive and open-minded during your language adventure. If you're feeling happy and confident, you'll learn faster. But if you're stressed or scared, your compass might lead you off course. Example: imagine feeling excited to try speaking the new language with someone new. That's like following your emotional compass in the right direction. So, with Krashen as our guide, we journey through the magical forest of language, facing challenges, collecting treasures, and keeping our spirits high. And with each step, we become braver and more fluent in the beautiful language awaiting us at the end of our adventure. Imagine you're learning to ride a bike. Stephen Krashen, a smart language expert, thinks learning a language is a lot like learning to ride that bike. First, he says there are two ways you can learn to ride: learning and acquiring. Learning is when someone teaches you all the rules of riding, like keep your balance or pedal forward. Acquiring, on the other hand, is when you just hop on the bike and practice until you get better without thinking too much about the rules. Now, Krashen talks about something called the I+1 theory. Imagine you're on a bike. I is what you already know about biking, and +1 is something a little bit harder that you can still manage. So, if you're just starting out, maybe riding on a flat road is I, and trying to ride up a small hill is +1. You'll improve best when you're tackling challenges that are just a bit harder than what you're used to. Krashen also talks about something called comprehensible input. This is like listening to someone explain how to ride a bike in a way that you can understand, even if you're not great at biking yet. If someone talks to you about riding a bike in a language you don't understand, it's like trying to learn without comprehensible input. It's hard to get better. He also mentions extensive reading, which is like reading lots of different bike manuals or stories about biking. The more you read about biking, the better you understand how it works, and the better you'll get at it. Finally, Krashen talks about the affective filter. This is like having a mental gate that can block your learning if you're too nervous or worried. If you're too scared of falling off your bike, you might not learn as quickly. But if you're feeling confident and excited, you'll learn much faster. So, according to Krashen, to learn a language well, you should dive in and practice a lot, like riding a bike. Make sure you understand what you're learning, comprehensible input. Read a ton in that language, extensive reading. And stay positive and confident, effective filter. With these ideas, you'll be speaking like a pro in no time. Let's explore his theory from 4 different angles. Theoretical perspective. Krashen's theory is rooted in linguistics and cognitive psychology. He emphasizes the distinction between language acquisition, which is subconscious and informal, and language learning, which is conscious and formal. His theory draws on principles of natural language acquisition, asserting that humans acquire language through exposure to comprehensible input rather than explicit instruction. Krashen's hypotheses, including the acquisition learning hypothesis, input hypothesis, and effective filter hypothesis, form the theoretical framework of his approach. Practical perspective. From a practical standpoint, Krashen's theory advocates for language instruction methods that prioritize exposure to comprehensible input, such as immersion programs, extensive reading, and meaningful communication activities. Language teachers can apply Krashen's principles by providing students with rich and engaging language input, creating an environment where learners feel comfortable taking risks and communicating in the target language. Pedagogical perspective. Krashen's theory has significant implications for language pedagogy. Educators can design curriculum and lesson plans that align with his principles, emphasizing meaningful communication, extensive reading, and creating opportunities for language acquisition through authentic experiences. Pedagogical approaches such as communicative language teaching and content-based instruction are influenced by Krashen's emphasis on language input and meaningful interaction. Policy perspective. Krashen's theory has implications for language education policies at the institutional and governmental levels. He advocates for policies that support bilingual education, promote multiculturalism, and recognize the importance of students' first languages in the language learning process. Language policies that prioritize providing comprehensible input, supporting diverse language learners, and fostering positive attitudes toward language learning align with Krashen's theoretical framework. By examining Stephen Krashen's theory of language learning from these different perspectives, we gain a comprehensive understanding of its theoretical underpinnings, practical applications, pedagogical implications, and policy considerations. His work continues to influence language education worldwide, shaping how languages are taught and learned in diverse contexts.